The howl of the wind was like a woman wailing across the barren desert, as Vaughn Tucker pulled his bay mare to a sudden halt. There in the golden light of sunset, a sight that would haunt any decent man, a woman's body sprawled across the hard, packed earth. Her pale blue dress stained crimson, golden hair splayed like a broken halo around her head. Vaughn dismounted quickly, spurs jangling as his boots hit the ground, his heart pounding against his ribs as he approached the still form. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The land was as harsh and unforgiving as the men who sought to tame it. Vaughn had seen his share of death in his 32 years, but something about this woman struck him differently. Perhaps it was the wedding band that glinted on her finger in the dying light, or the small locket clutched in her palm. He knelt beside her, expecting to find another soul claimed by the merciless frontier. Then her eyelids fluttered. A weak, rattling breath escaped her lips. "Madam," Vaughn touched her shoulder gently. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of summer cornflowers, clouded with pain and confusion. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Please don't hurt me." "I ain't gonna hurt you," Vaughn said, reaching for his canteen. "You're safe now." He lifted her head gently, helping her take small sips of water. As he did, he took inventory of her injuries. A nasty gash across her forehead, bruises blooming on her cheekbone and jaw. Her wrists were raw and abraded as though she'd been bound. These weren't the injuries of a fall or an accident, these were marks of deliberate cruelty. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lillian," she whispered. "Lillian Shepard." "Who did this to you, Mrs. Shepard?" Her eyes welled with tears. "My husband, Robert, he said he was tired of me. Said it would be easier if I just—" Her voice broke on a sob, a cold, hard knot formed in Vaughn's gut. "Your husband did this and left you out here to die," she nodded weakly, a single tear trailing through the dust on her cheek. Vaughn's jaw tightened as he looked across the empty landscape, imagining the kind of man who could do such a thing. "He'll answer for that," he said, his voice low and grave as thunder before a storm. "I promise you he will, but promises of justice would have to wait." Lillian needed care, and quickly. The nearest town, Timber Creek, was still a half-day's ride, and night was falling fast. Vaughn carefully lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her and cradling her broken body against his chest. "I've got a camp about an hour from here," he told her. "We'll get you fixed up, then head to town for a proper doctor tomorrow." As they rode, Lillian drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally whimpering in pain when the horse's gait jostled her injuries. Vaughn found himself talking to keep her aware, telling her about the stars appearing above them, about the herd of mustangs he'd seen that morning, about anything to keep her tethered to the world of the living. His campsite was nestled in a small canyon, sheltered from the wind by high rock walls. A creek burbled nearby, providing sweet water. He'd chosen it carefully 3 days ago, planning to stay while he scouted for stray cattle from the double-bar ranch where he worked. With practiced efficiency, Vaughn built up the fire, then set about tending to Lillian's wounds. In the firelight, the extent of her injuries became clearer, and his anger burned hotter. Beyond the visible bruises, her ribs were badly bruised, possibly broken. When he carefully removed her boot to check a swollen ankle, she cried out in pain. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm trying to be gentle." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "You're the first gentle thing I've felt in years." The simple statement struck Vaughn like a physical blow. He paused in his ministrations, meeting her gaze. "No woman should ever have to say such a thing," he said softly. He brewed a strong tea with willow bark to help with her pain and fever, then prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. Lillian managed only a few bites before exhaustion claimed her. Vaughn wrapped her in his spare blanket, adding his coat for good measure, then sat beside the fire, rifle across his knees, keeping watch through the long night. As dawn broke across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Vaughn checked on Lillian again. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breathing shallow. The fever had taken hold. They needed to reach town, and soon. He broke camp quickly, lifting Lillian onto his horse as gently as possible. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "We're heading to Timber Creek," he explained. "You need a doctor." "Thank you," she murmured, her voice weak. What's your name?" "Vaughn Tucker, madam, cowhand for the double bar." "Vaughn," she repeated, testing the name. "Thank you for saving my life." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Let's get you to that doctor first." The ride to Timber Creek was slow and agonizing. Vaughn kept to a walk, mindful of Lillian's injuries, but even the gentlest pace caused her pain. By mid-morning, she was burning with fever, occasionally muttering incoherently. Vaughn felt a growing fear that he might lose her before they reached help. It was past noon when the weathered buildings of Timber Creek appeared on the horizon. The small frontier town consisted of little more than a main street lined with wooden structures, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and, thankfully, the residence of Dr. Samuel Patterson. Vaughn rode directly to the doctor's house, calling out before he'd even fully stopped. "Doc, need help out here?" Dr. Patterson, a gray, bearded man in his 60s, emerged from the house wiping his hands on a towel. One look at Lillian and he was shouting for his wife to prepare a bed. "What happened?" he asked as he helped Vaughn carry Lillian inside. "Her husband beat her and left her to die in the desert," Vaughn answered, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Found her yesterday evening about 20 miles south." The doctor's expression darkened. "Bring her in here. Martha's got the bed ready." Mrs. Patterson, a kindly woman with capable hands, helped settle Lillian in the spare room that served as the doctor's infirmary. She shooed Vaughn out while they removed Lillian's filthy, blood-stained dress to properly assess her injuries. Vaughn paced the small front room, hat in hands, worry etching lines around his eyes. He'd known Lillian Shepard for less than a day, yet he felt responsible for her in a way he couldn't fully understand. Perhaps it was simply human decency, or perhaps it was something more, the connection formed in those vulnerable moments when he'd carried her through the darkness. After what seemed an eternity, Dr. Patterson emerged from the sick room. "She's in a bad way," he said grimly. 3 broken ribs, that ankle's badly sprained, and she's lost blood from that head wound. The fever's concerning 2 infections setting in." "Will she live?" Vaughn asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "If we can break the fever, yes. Martha's bathing her now with cool water. I've given her laudanum for the pain. The next day or 2 will tell." The doctor studied Vaughn thoughtfully. "You said her husband did this." "That's what she told me. Name's Robert Shepard." The doctor nodded slowly. "Robert Shepard, tall fellow, dark hair and beard. Came through about 6 months back with a pretty blonde wife. Could be. I've never met the man." Vaughn's hands tightened around his hat brim. "You know where I might find him?" Dr. Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Now, son, I understand how you're feeling, but taking the law into your own hands won't help that girl in there. I'm not looking to string him up, Doc. Just want to have a conversation about how a man should treat his wife." The doctor clearly didn't believe him. "Last I heard, Shepard was working for the Blackwater Mining Company up near the foothills. But Vaughn," he added, laying a hand on the cowboy's arm, "Sheriff Miller might want to have words with Shepard too. This is a matter for the law." Vaughn nodded, though the fire in his eyes didn't diminish. "I'll keep that in mind. "Can I see her before I go?" "She's sleeping now," the doctor said. "Best let her rest. Martha and I will take good care of her." "I'll be back tomorrow to check on her," Vaughn said. "It wasn't a question." "I'd expect nothing less, Doctor." Patterson replied with a knowing look. Vaughn stepped back into the harsh sunlight, mind racing. His first instinct was to mount up and ride straight for the mining camp, to find Robert Shepard and deliver the justice Lillian deserved. But the doctor was right, that wouldn't help her now. She needed time to heal, and Vaughn needed more information before confronting the man who'd left his wife to die. He crossed the dusty street to the sheriff's office. A bell jangled as he entered, finding Sheriff Miller hunched over paperwork at his desk. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Vaughn said, removing his hat. Sheriff Miller looked up, recognition crossing his weathered face. "Tucker, ain't it? From the double bar?" "Yes, sir. Got something to report." Vaughn explained how he'd found Lillian, her condition, and what she'd told him about her husband's actions. The sheriff's expression grew increasingly grim as Vaughn spoke. When he finished, Miller let out a long sigh and leaned back in his chair. "Attempted murder's a hanging offense," he said. "If what Mrs. Shepard says is true, her husband's got a date with the gallows." "It's true," Vaughn said firmly. "No woman would do that to herself, then drag herself 20 miles into the desert to die. No, I reckon not." The sheriff pulled a piece of paper toward him and began writing. "I'll send a telegram to the sheriff up in Pine Ridge, that's the closest town to the mining camp. Have him bring Shepard in for questioning." He glanced up at Vaughn. "And I'd advise you to stay clear of this, Tucker. Let the law handle it." "All due respect, Sheriff, but I made a promise to Mrs. Shepard that her husband would answer for what he did." "And he will to a judge and jury, not to you." Miller's voice hardened. "Don't make me lock you up to keep you from doing something foolish." Vaughn's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "I understand." "Good. Now, I'll need a full statement from Mrs. Shepard when she's able. In the meantime, I suggest you head back to the double bar and leave this to me." But Vaughn had no intention of riding back to the ranch, not while Lillian fought for her life in the doctor's house. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," he said. "Promised the doc I'd check in on Mrs. Shepard tomorrow." Sheriff Miller studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Just remember what I said. Justice comes from the law, not the barrel of a gun." Vaughn touched the brim of his hat and left the sheriff's office. The sun was beginning its westward descent, casting long shadows across the street. He led his tired mare to the livery stable, arranging for her care, then made his way to the hotel. The Timber Creek Hotel was a modest 2-story building with clean, if spare, accommodations. Vaughn took a room, washed away the trail dust as best he could with the pitcher and basin provided, and headed to the restaurant for a hot meal, his first proper one in days. As he ate, his mind kept returning to Lillian Shepard, the fear in her eyes when she'd first seen him, the quiet dignity she maintained despite her pain, the way she'd trusted him, a stranger, because she had no other choice. And beneath it all, the burning question: what kind of man could do such a thing to his own wife? After dinner, Vaughn found himself drawn back to the doctor's house. He didn't expect to see Lillian, she'd be sleeping still, but he needed to know if there'd been any change in her condition. Mrs. Patterson answered his knock, her expression softening when she recognized him. "I thought we might see you again before the night was through," she said. "Come in." "How is she?" Vaughn asked, stepping inside and removing his hat. "The fever's still high, but she's resting as comfortably as can be expected. Samuel says the next few hours will be critical." She studied Vaughn's worried face. "You care for this woman, don't you? Even though you just met her?" Vaughn shifted uncomfortably under her perceptive gaze. "Just seems like she's had more than her fair share of hardship. Thought someone ought to be concerned for her welfare." Well, she's fortunate you were the one who found her. Mrs. Patterson patted his arm. You should get some rest yourself. You look dead on your feet. I will, madam. Just wanted to check in before turning in. As Vaughn turned to leave, a weak voice called from the sick room. Vaughn, is that you? Mrs. Patterson raised her eyebrows. She's been asking for you. Go on in, but just for a moment. She needs her rest. Vaughn entered the darkened sick room, where a single lamp burned low on the bedside table. Lillian lay propped against several pillows, her golden hair brushed and braided, her face pale except for the feverish spots of color high on her cheekbones. Clean bandages wrapped her head wound and a quilt covered her to the chest, revealing a borrowed nightgown. You came back, she said softly as he approached the bed. Said I would. He stood awkwardly, hat in hands. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo. She attempted a smile, but it wavered. The doctor says I have you to thank for my life. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said with quiet certainty. Not anyone. Her blue eyes, bright with fever, held his. Have you? Have you found Robert? Vaughn hesitated. Not yet. Sheriff's sending word to Pine Ridge to have him brought in. Fear flashed across her face. He'll deny it. He'll say I ran off, had an accident. No one will believe I believe you, Vaughn interrupted firmly. The sheriff believes you. And when folks see what he did to you, they'll believe too. A tear slipped down her cheek. You don't know him. He can be persuasive, charming when he wants to be. Her hand trembled as she clutched the quilt. He'll come for me when he finds out I'm alive. He'll finish what he started. No, he won't. Vaughn's voice was steel. I won't let that happen. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. That's enough for tonight. Mrs. Shepard needs her rest, and so do you, Mr. Tucker. Vaughn nodded, but before leaving he reached out and briefly touched Lillian's hand where it lay on the quilt. You're safe now, he promised. Get some sleep. As he walked back to the hotel through the quiet streets of Timber Creek, Vaughn's mind was made up. Despite the sheriff's warning, he couldn't simply wait for the law to take its course. Tomorrow, he'd ride to Pine Ridge and find Robert Shepard himself. Dawn came with a gentle rain pattering against the hotel window. Vaughn had slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by images of Lillian lying broken in the desert. He rose early, splashed water on his face, and headed downstairs for breakfast. The hotel dining room was nearly empty at this hour. Vaughn took a seat by the window, watching the rain create muddy rivulets in the street while he waited for his meal. He was halfway through his eggs and bacon when Sheriff Miller appeared in the doorway, scanning the room before spotting Vaughn. The sheriff's grim expression told Vaughn that whatever news he brought wasn't good. He set down his fork as Miller approached. Morning, Sheriff. You're out early. Got a telegram back from Pine Ridge, Miller said, pulling out a chair. Seems Robert Shepard left the mining camp 3 days ago. Collected his pay and said he was heading to Denver. Vaughn's jaw tightened. He's running. Looks that way, the sheriff sighed. I've sent wires to Denver and stations along the way, but if he's smart, he'll avoid the main routes. So you're saying he might get away with it? Vaughn couldn't keep the edge from his voice. I'm saying it might take time to find him. Miller fixed Vaughn with a hard stare. And I'm still saying this is a matter for the law, not for you. With all due respect, Sheriff, the law seems to be a step behind. Maybe so, but that doesn't give you the right to take justice into your own hands. Miller leaned forward. I know your type, Tucker, man of principle, but principles can get a man killed if he's not careful. Vaughn met the sheriff's gaze steadily. Some principles are worth the risk. Miller shook his head. I was afraid you'd say something like that. He stood, adjusting his gun belt. I'm heading over to check on Mrs. Shepard, see if she's well enough to give a formal statement. You're welcome to join me, but I want your word you won't go chasing after Shepard on your own. Vaughn hesitated, torn between his desire for justice and his concern for Lillian. Finally, he nodded. "I'll come with you to see Mrs. Shepard." The sheriff seemed to accept this as close to a promise as he was going to get. Together, they walked through the rain to Dr. Patterson's house. Mrs. Patterson greeted them with a weary smile. "She had a rough night," she told them. "The fever broke around dawn, which is a blessing, but she's very weak. Samuel says she can have visitors, but only briefly." They found Lillian propped up in bed, looking pale but more alert than the previous evening. Her blue eyes brightened slightly at the sight of Vaughn. "Mrs. Shepard," Sheriff Miller said gently, "how are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you," she replied, her voice still weak. "Doctor Patterson says I was lucky." "Yes, madam, you were." The sheriff pulled up a chair beside her bed. "I hate to trouble you when you're recovering, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened." Vaughn moved to leave the room, but Lillian's voice stopped him. "Please stay," she said, a note of vulnerability in her tone. "If you don't mind." He nodded, taking a position by the window where he could watch the rain while giving them some privacy for the interview. Over the next half hour, Lillian recounted her ordeal. Her marriage to Robert Shepard 2 years earlier in St. Louis. Their move west when he took the job at the mining company. The beatings that began shortly after they arrived in Wyoming. And finally, the day he'd decided he no longer wanted a wife. "He'd been drinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than usual. He said he'd met someone else, a widow in Pine Ridge with money, said I was holding him back. When I told him I'd leave quietly, go back east to my sister, he laughed." She paused, fighting tears. "He said dead wives don't cause problems for new marriages." Sheriff Miller's pencil scratched across his notebook as he documented her statement. "And then what happened, Mrs. Shepard? He beat me. Worse than ever before. I thought he would kill me right there, but then he stopped. Tied my hands and put me on his horse. We rode for hours into the desert. When we stopped, he pulled me off the horse and hit me again, said the coyotes would take care of what was left." A tear slipped down her cheek. "The last thing I remember before Mr. Tucker found me was Robert riding away, not even looking back." The sheriff's expression was grim. "Thank you, Mrs. Shepard. I know that wasn't easy to relive. I've sent telegrams to law enforcement in several towns. We'll find him." Lillian nodded, but Vaughn could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe Robert would be caught, or if he was, that he would face justice. "Get some rest now," Sheriff Miller said, standing. "Doctor says you'll be staying here a few more days at least." "I have no money," Lillian admitted, a flush of embarrassment coloring her pale cheeks. "Robert controlled everything." "Don't you worry about that," Mrs. Patterson interjected from the doorway. "We've taken care of folks in need before, and we'll do it again." When the sheriff had finished, he motioned for Vaughn to follow him outside. On the covered porch, sheltered from the rain, Miller turned to face him. "You heard her story. Now do you understand why this needs to be handled properly? If Shepard is convicted of attempted murder, he'll hang. But if you go after him yourself, you could end up on those same gallows." Vaughn knew the sheriff was right, but the thought of Robert Shepard potentially escaping justice burned in his gut like coal. "What if you don't find him?" "We will. Men like that make mistakes. They get overconfident." Miller studied Vaughn's face. "In the meantime, Mrs. Shepard needs a friend more than she needs an avenger. Think about that." After the sheriff left, Vaughn remained on the porch watching the rain. Miller's words echoed in his mind. Lillian did need a friend. Perhaps that was where his focus should be, at least for now. He returned to her room to find Mrs. Patterson changing the bandage on Lillian's head wound. "There now," the older woman said, securing the fresh dressing. "That's looking better already." "Thank you," Lillian said softly. She noticed Vaughn in the doorway and offered a small smile. "You're still here." "Thought I'd stay in town a few days," he said. "Make sure you're on the mend before heading back to the ranch, Mrs." Patterson gathered her supplies with a knowing glance between them. "I'll leave you two to talk. Don't tire her out, Mr. Tucker." When they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Vaughn cleared his throat. "Is there anyone I should notify for you? Family back east?" Lillian shook her head slightly. "Just my sister in Boston, but I haven't spoken to her since I married Robert. He didn't allow it." She looked down at her hands, where her wedding band still encircled her finger. With a sudden movement, she pulled it off and set it on the bedside table. "I never want to see this again." "I understand," Vaughn said gently. "What will you do when you're recovered?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no money, no possessions except what I'm wearing, and Robert." She trailed off, fear flickering across her face. "You don't have to decide anything now," Vaughn assured her. "Just focus on getting better." Over the next several days, Vaughn fell into a routine. Mornings at the hotel for breakfast, then checking in at the sheriff's office for any news about Robert Shepard. The rest of his days were spent at Dr. Patterson's house, keeping Lillian company as she slowly regained her strength. He read to her from books Mrs. Patterson provided, brought her wildflowers he'd gathered from the hills outside town, told her stories of his life as a cowhand, the cattle drives and blizzards and adventures that had shaped him. And in turn, she began to share pieces of herself, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dreams of teaching school before she met Robert, her love of painting landscapes. "I used to paint the sunsets back home," she told him on the fourth day, sitting up in bed while he whittled a small wooden horse by the window. "Robert said it was a waste of time and money. He broke my brushes one night when dinner was late." Vaughn's hand tightened around his knife, but he kept his voice even. "Sounds like Robert was afraid of anything that brought you joy." "I think he was," she said thoughtfully. "He wanted me completely dependent on him, isolated, broken." She looked up, a new strength in her blue eyes. "But I'm not broken. Not anymore." Vaughn felt something shift in his chest at her words. Admiration, certainly, but something deeper too. Something he wasn't ready to name. On the sixth day, Dr. Patterson declared that Lillian could leave the sick room for short periods. Vaughn helped her to the front porch, where Mrs. Patterson had set up a comfortable chair. The fresh air brought color to Lillian's cheeks as she basked in the warm sunshine. "It feels like I've been reborn," she said, lifting her face to the sky. "A week ago I thought I would die alone in the desert. Now here I am, alive and free." She turned to look at Vaughn. "Because of you. You're stronger than you know," he replied. "You would have found a way to survive with or without me. Perhaps, but I'm glad it was with you." She reached out hesitantly, and after a moment's surprise, Vaughn took her hand. Her fingers were slender and cool against his calloused palm. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Miller, his expression serious as he approached the porch. "Mrs. Shepard," he said, nodding to Lillian before turning to Vaughn. "Tucker, got news from Denver." Vaughn released Lillian's hand, noting the fear that immediately shadowed her face. "What is it?" "Robert Shepard was spotted boarding a train to Kansas City 3 days ago. Local law tried to apprehend him, but he got away in the crowd." Miller sighed heavily. "They're still looking, but he could be halfway to Mexico by now." Lillian's face drained of color. "So he's free. He'll get away with it." "We don't know that yet," the sheriff said, but his tone lacked conviction. "We've alerted authorities all along the southern routes." Vaughn felt a cold resolve hardening inside him. Sheriff Miller had tried it his way, and Robert Shepard was still free, while Lillian lived in fear. That wasn't justice. "I need to speak with you privately, Sheriff," Vaughn said, his voice tight. Miller seemed to read his intentions. "Mrs. Shepard, would you excuse us for a moment?" When they'd moved out of earshot, Vaughn turned to face the lawman. "I'm going after him." "The hell you are," Miller growled. "I told you to leave this to the law, and I have, for a week. Meanwhile, he's getting further away every day." Vaughn gestured toward Lillian. "Look at her, Sheriff. She deserves justice, not excuses about jurisdiction and crowded train stations." "And what exactly do you plan to do if you find him? Shoot him down like a rabid dog?" "I plan to bring him back to stand trial," Vaughn said firmly. "Just like you would." Miller studied him skeptically. "You expect me to believe that? I give you my word." "If I find him, I'll bring him back alive to face a judge." Vaughn met the sheriff's gaze steadily, "but he needs to answer for what he did." After a long moment, Miller sighed. "You're a stubborn son of a gun, Tucker." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper. This came with the telegram. Description of Shepard and the clothes he was wearing when last seen. "Might help if you're fool enough to go through with this." Vaughn took the paper, surprised by the sheriff's concession. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I still think you're making a mistake." Miller glanced toward Lillian. "What about her? She's still recovering." "Dr. Patterson says she'll need at least another week before she's strong enough to travel," Vaughn said. "By then, Shepard could be anywhere. I need to leave now if there's any hope of finding him." "And have you discussed this with Mrs. Shepard? She might not want you risking your neck on her behalf." Vaughn hadn't, and the thought of telling Lillian he was leaving sent an unexpected pang through his chest. In the short time he'd known her, she'd come to matter to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I'll talk to her," he promised. "Today." That evening, after dinner at the doctor's house, Vaughn asked Lillian if she felt up to a short walk. The evening was mild, the sunset painting the western sky in vibrant oranges and purples. They moved slowly down the quiet street, Lillian leaning on Vaughn's arm for support. "You're getting stronger every day," he observed, watching her determined steps. "Doctor Patterson says I'm healing faster than he expected." She glanced up at him with a small smile. "Good company is apparently excellent medicine." They reached a bench at the edge of town and sat, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Vaughn knew he couldn't delay the difficult conversation any longer. "Lillian," he began, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something." She must have sensed what was coming because her smile faded. "You're leaving?" "Yes, tomorrow morning." He turned to face her. "I'm going after Robert." Fear flashed across her face. "No, Vaughn, please don't. He's dangerous. So am I when I need to be." He took her hand. "Lillian, I can't let him get away with what he did to you. It isn't right." "I don't want justice if it means you getting hurt," she said fiercely. "You've already done more for me than anyone in my life. And I'll do more yet," he promised. "I'll bring him back to face trial, make sure he can never hurt you or anyone else again." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." Vaughn hesitated, the truth of his feelings still taking shape in his own heart. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you deserved better than what life's given you so far. And I know that the thought of that man walking free while you suffer makes me sick to my soul." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you won't come back." "I will," he said with quiet certainty. "That's a promise, Lillian." She studied his face in the fading light, as if memorizing his features. Then, with a courage that took his breath away, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, a whisper of connection that ended almost as soon as it began. Lillian pulled back, a blush spreading across her cheeks. "Something to come back for," she said softly. Vaughn's heart hammered in his chest as he reached out to brush a strand of golden hair from her face. "I don't need extra incentive," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'll take it all the same." Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning as Vaughn prepared to leave Timber Creek. He'd settled his bill at the hotel, collected supplies for the journey, and retrieved his mare from the livery stable. The last stop before riding out was Dr. Patterson's house, where he found Lillian waiting on the porch. She dressed in a simple blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Patterson, her golden hair braided and wrapped around her head. Though still pale, she stood straighter than she had the day before, a new determination in her bearing. "I wasn't sure you'd come say goodbye," she said as he approached. "Wouldn't leave without it." He removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. Last night's kiss hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Lillian stepped forward and handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for the journey," she explained. "Mrs. Patterson helped me make it." Vaughn unwrapped the package to find a small loaf of bread and a handkerchief white cotton with the letter L embroidered in blue thread. "It's not much," she said apologetically. "I wish I had more to give you." "It's perfect," he assured her, carefully tucking the items into his saddlebag. He hesitated, then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I wrote down where to find me when this is over. The Double Bar Ranch outside of Laramie." She took the paper, their fingers brushing. "How long will you be gone? Hard to say. Could be weeks. Depends on how far Shepard's run and how good he is at hiding." He studied her face, memorizing the delicate curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, the startling blue of her eyes. "Dr. Patterson says you'll be well enough to travel soon. Mrs. Patterson mentioned her sister in Cheyenne might take you in until you decide what to do next." Lillian nodded. "She's been very kind. Everyone has." She looked up at him, vulnerability and courage warring in her expression. "Will I see you again, after?" "If you want to," he said simply. "I do." No hesitation in her voice. Vaughn felt something tight in his chest loosen at her words. "Then you will." The moment stretched between them, filled with things neither was ready to say. Finally, Vaughn put his hat back on and stepped toward his horse. "I'd better get moving. Long ride ahead." Lillian nodded, blinking back tears. "Be careful, Vaughn, please." He mounted his mare, looking down at the woman who'd somehow become so important to him in such a short time. "I will." "You take care of yourself, Lillian. Get strong. I promise." With a final tip of his hat, Vaughn turned his horse and rode out of Timber Creek, the weight of Lillian's gaze following him until the town disappeared behind him. The trail to Kansas City was long and hard, taking Vaughn across the vast Wyoming plains, through the rugged Nebraska Territory, and into the more settled lands of Kansas. He pushed himself and his mount, stopping only when necessary, driven by the fear that each passing day gave Robert Shepard more opportunity to disappear. When he finally reached Kansas City, 11 days later, the bustling frontier town overwhelmed his senses after so many days of solitude on the trail. Streets crowded with wagons and horses, storefronts advertising everything from dry goods to dentistry. Saloons and hotels on every corner. It was a far cry from the quiet streets of Timber Creek. Vaughn's first stop was the sheriff's office, where he presented the telegram from Sheriff Miller and explained his purpose. The local lawman, a burly man named Dawson, regarded him skeptically. "Shepard, huh? Yeah, we had word about him. Spotted boarding a southbound train, but he gave my deputy the slip." Dawson leaned back in his chair. "That was nearly 3 weeks ago now. Could be anywhere." "Any idea where he was headed?" Vaughn asked, hiding his frustration. "Deputy said he heard him asking about trains to St. Louis, but that could have been a false trail." Dawson shrugged. "Man on the run doesn't usually announce his real destination." It wasn't much to go on, but it was all Vaughn had. He thanked the sheriff and set out to check the hotels and boarding houses, showing the description of Robert Shepard to clerks and proprietors throughout the city. By nightfall, He'd visited over a dozen establishments with nothing to show for his efforts. Exhausted, he took a room at a modest hotel near the train station and collapsed onto the bed, his body aching from days in the saddle. As he drifted toward sleep, Lillian's face appeared in his mind, her gentle smile, the trust in her blue eyes when she looked at him. He wondered how she was healing, if she'd moved on to Cheyenne yet, if she ever thought of him in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her. The memory of their brief kiss warmed him as he finally surrendered to exhaustion. Morning brought renewed determination. Vaughn expanded his search to the saloons and gambling houses, places a man might go to drink away his troubles or win enough money to continue running. It was in the third such establishment, a dingy saloon called the Silver Dollar, that he finally caught a break. Shepard. The bartender, a lanky man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember him. Mean drunk. Got into a fight with one of my regulars about 2 weeks back." Vaughn felt his pulse quicken. "Do you know where he went after that?" Said something about heading to Texas. "Land of Opportunity," he called it. The bartender wiped the counter with a stained rag. Left with some cattle buyers who were passing through, seemed like he was in a hurry to be gone. These cattle buyers, did they mention where in Texas they were from? The bartender thought for a moment. "San Antonio, I think. Or maybe it was Austin, one of those southern towns." It wasn't much, but it was more than Vaughn had before. Texas was vast, but if Shepard was traveling with cattle buyers, there were only so many routes they might take. He spent one more day in Kansas City gathering information, then set out on the long journey south. The Kansas countryside gave way to the Indian Territory, a dangerous landscape where law was scarce and bandits were common. Vaughn kept his rifle close and his eyes open, pushing on through sweltering days and sleeping lightly during the brief nights. All the while, his thoughts returned to Lillian. She would be fully recovered by now, perhaps already settled in Cheyenne with Mrs. Patterson's sister. He wondered if she still waited for news of him, or if the realities of rebuilding her life had pushed thoughts of the cowboy who'd found her to the edges of her mind. Nearly a month after leaving Timber Creek, Vaughn rode into Dallas, Texas. The city was larger than he'd expected, a sprawling center of commerce where cattle, cotton, and people converged from all directions. Finding one man in such a place seemed nearly impossible, but Vaughn was not deterred. He established a routine, checking hotels and saloons during the day, visiting the cattle yards and auction houses in the evenings when buyers and sellers gathered to do business. Days stretched into a week with no sign of Robert Shepard, but Vaughn refused to give up. His persistence was rewarded on the 8th day in Dallas. At a saloon frequented by cattlemen, Vaughn overheard a conversation about a newcomer working for the Circle G ranch, a man from up north who'd arrived with the Harrington cattle buyers about a month earlier. "Cold-eyed fellow," one man was saying, "keeps to himself mostly but quick with his fists when riled." "Harrington shouldn't have hired him," his companion replied. "Something not right about that one." Vaughn approached their table, touching the brim of his hat. "Pardon the interruption, gentlemen. This man you're talking about, would his name happen to be Shepard?" "Robert Shepard." The men exchanged glances. "That's him," the first man confirmed. "You know him." "We have unfinished business," Vaughn said carefully. "Any idea where I might find him?" "Circle G, about 20 miles east of town. Big operation. Can't miss it." Vaughn thanked them and bought a round of drinks for the table before leaving. Outside, he leaned against the wall of the saloon, his heart racing. After more than a month of searching, he was finally close to finding Robert Shepard. But now that the moment was approaching, Vaughn found himself questioning his next move. His promise to Sheriff Miller had been to bring Shepard back alive to face trial. but would Shepard come willingly? And if not, was Vaughn prepared to force him? He thought of Lillian, of the bruises that had marred her fair skin, of the fear in her eyes when she spoke of her husband. Yes, he decided. Whatever it took, Robert Shepard would face justice for what he'd done. Vaughn left Dallas at first light the next morning, riding east toward the Circle G ranch. The Texas landscape was different from the Wyoming Territory he knew flatter, with scattered groves of live oak and mesquite breaking up the grasslands. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, and by mid-morning both Vaughn and his mare were lathered with sweat. The Circle G ranch house came into view around noon, a substantial two-story structure surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. A dozen cowboys were visible, some working with horses in the corrals, others moving between buildings. Vaughn approached slowly, aware of curious eyes turning in his direction. A man who appeared to be the foreman met him as he dismounted. "Help you, stranger, looking for work." Vaughn improvised, deciding a direct approach might spook Shepard into running again. Might be. Boss is always looking for experienced hands. You got experience. 8 years with the double bar in Wyoming Territory. Drove herds to Cheyenne, Laramie, even up to Montana. All true, though not his reason for being there. The foreman nodded, impressed. "Name's Collins, you, Vaughn Tucker." He saw no reason to lie about his identity. "Well, Tucker, you're in luck. Boss is here today. Let me take you to him." Collins led Vaughn to the main house, where they found the ranch owner, a gray-haired man named George Gardner, going over ledgers in his study. After a brief interview, during which Vaughn demonstrated his knowledge of cattle and range management, Gardner offered him a job. "We're short-handed with fall roundup coming," Gardner explained. "You can start tomorrow. Collins will show you to the bunkhouse." "Appreciate it," Vaughn said. "Actually, I heard an old acquaintance might be working here. Robert Shepard, from up north." Gardner's expression darkened slightly. "Shepard, yes, came on about a month ago. Keeps to himself mostly." "He around today?" Vaughn asked, keeping his tone casual. "Should be out with the herd in the south pasture," Collins said. "Won't be back till sundown." That gave Vaughn time to settle in and plan his approach. He followed Collins to the bunkhouse, stowed his gear on an empty bunk, and spent the afternoon helping with chores around the ranch yard, all the while watching for Shepard's return. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a group of riders appeared in the distance. Vaughn paused in the act of mending a broken harness, his eyes fixed on the approaching cowboys. Even at a distance, he recognized Robert Shepard from the description, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and beard, riding a bay gelding with a distinctive white blaze. Vaughn's hand instinctively moved to his gun before he caught himself. Not here, not now, with witnesses all around. He'd bide his time, wait for the right moment. The riders dismounted at the corrals, leading their tired horses inside for unsaddling. Vaughn continued his work, keeping his head down while watching Shepard from the corner of his eye. The man moved with a confident swagger, laughing at something another cowboy said. Nothing in his manner suggested he was haunted by the attempted murder of his wife. Dinner in the bunkhouse that evening was a boisterous affair, with 20 men crowded around long tables, passing platters of beans, beef, and biscuits. Vaughn took a seat where he could observe Shepard without being obvious about it. Up close, he could see that the man was handsome in a rough way, with sharp features and cold gray eyes that never quite matched his easy smile. Collins made introductions, and when he reached Vaughn, Shepard gave him a cursory nod before returning to his meal. There was no recognition in his eyes. He'd never seen the man who'd found Lillian in the desert, who'd carried her to safety and promised her justice. After dinner, most of the men headed to their bunks, exhausted from a long day's work. A few, including Shepard, pulled out a deck of cards and started a poker game. Vaughn joined them, seeing an opportunity to study his quarry more closely. "You're from Wyoming, Tucker?" one of the cowboys asked as he dealt the cards. "That's right. Double Bar Ranch north of Laramie." Shepard glanced up, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he masked it. "What brings you all the way to Texas?" "Change of scenery," Vaughn replied, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "And some unfinished business." "What kind of business?" Shepard asked, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "Personal matter." Vaughn arranged his cards, keeping his expression neutral. "Involving a lady." A muscle twitched in Shepard's jaw. "Women," he said with a forced laugh. "More trouble than they're worth, most of 'em." "Depends on the woman," Vaughn replied, his voice cooling. "And the man." The game continued, tension simmering beneath the surface. Vaughn lost a few hands deliberately, letting Shepard build confidence. When the other players gradually drifted away to their bunks, leaving just the two of them, Vaughn made his move. "Strange coincidence meeting you here," he said quietly, shuffling the deck. "Been looking for you a long time, Shepard." Shepard froze, his hand halfway to his glass of whiskey. "What are you talking about? We've never met." "No, but I met your wife." Vaughn continued shuffling, his eyes never leaving Shepard's face. "Found her in the desert outside Timber Creek, left for dead." All color drained from Shepard's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Vaughn's voice was soft, dangerous. "Lillian. Pretty blonde woman, blue eyes. You beat her nearly to death and left her to die alone." Shepard's hand moved toward his gun, but Vaughn was faster, his pistol appearing as if by magic, aimed steadily at the other man's chest. "I wouldn't," Vaughn advised. "I'm not here to kill you, Shepard. I'm taking you back to Wyoming to face trial." "Like hell you are," Shepard snarled, his charming facade crumbling. "Lillian's dead. She has to be." "She's very much alive," Vaughn said, "and she told the sheriff everything." Fear and rage warred in Shepard's expression. "You're lying. No one would believe her over me." "They already do. There's a warrant for your arrest for attempted murder." Vaughn kept his voice low, mindful of the sleeping cowboys nearby. "Now we can do this quietly, or we can make a scene." "Your choice." For a moment, Shepard seemed to consider his options. Then, with a sudden movement, he flung his whiskey glass at Vaughn's face and lunged for the door. Vaughn dodged the glass and fired, his bullet deliberately striking the door frame inches from Shepard's head. The shot brought the bunkhouse to instant alertness, cowboys reaching for guns and boots. "What the hell?" Collins demanded, emerging from his small private room. "This man is wanted for attempted murder in Wyoming Territory," Vaughn announced, his gun still trained on Shepard, who had frozen at the door. "I'm taking him back to stand trial." "He's lying," Shepard protested. "I've never—" "His name is Robert Shepard," Vaughn continued. "He beat his wife and left her to die in the desert. I have a telegram from Sheriff Miller of Timber Creek confirming the charges." Collins looked between them, confusion giving way to understanding. "Is that true, Shepard?" "Of course not," Shepard blustered, but his eyes darted around the room seeking escape. "Let's sort this out at the sheriff's office," Collins decided. "Boys, keep an eye on both of them while I saddle up." With multiple guns now pointed in their direction, neither Vaughn nor Shepard had much choice. Under escort, they rode to the nearest town, where the local sheriff was roused from his bed to deal with the situation. After examining the telegram Vaughn carried and sending a wire to Timber Creek for confirmation, the sheriff agreed to hold Shepard until arrangements could be made for his return to Wyoming. "You've come a long way for justice, Tucker," the sheriff observed as Shepard was led away to a cell. "Must be quite a woman, this Mrs. Shepard." "She is," Vaughn agreed, the image of Lillian's gentle smile appearing in his mind. More than worth the journey. 2 days later, with Shepard securely in custody and arrangements made for his transport north under guard, Vaughn began the long journey back to Wyoming. His task was complete. He had found Robert Shepard and ensured he would face justice for his crimes. Yet instead of satisfaction, Vaughn felt only a growing impatience to return to Timber Creek, to see Lillian again. The journey north seemed to take an eternity. Summer heat gave way to the first cool breezes of autumn as Vaughn crossed back into Wyoming Territory. When at last the familiar buildings of Timber Creek appeared on the horizon, his heart quickened with anticipation. His first stop was the sheriff's office, where Miller greeted him with surprised respect. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Tucker," the sheriff admitted. "Got word from Texas that Shepard's being brought back. You actually did it." "Told you I would," Vaughn said. "Is Lillian Mrs. Shepard still in town?" A shadow crossed Miller's face. "She left for Cheyenne about 2 weeks after you rode out, staying with Mrs. Patterson's sister, last I heard." Disappointment settled heavy in Vaughn's chest. He'd hoped, perhaps foolishly, that she might have waited for his return. "Did she leave any message for me?" he asked. "No message," Miller said. "But she did ask when you left if I thought you'd really come back." "Told her you seemed like a man who kept his promises." Vaughn nodded, absently touching the folded handkerchief he still carried in his vest pocket, the one with the blue L embroidered in the corner. "Guess I'll be riding to Cheyenne then." "Before you go," Miller said, reaching into his desk drawer, "this came for you about a week ago." He handed Vaughn a letter. The envelope bore his name in a delicate feminine hand. Vaughn thanked the sheriff and took the letter outside, finding a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree to read it. "Dear Mr. Tucker," it began formally, and Vaughn smiled at the propriety. "I hope this letter finds you well, wherever your journey has taken you. Dr. Patterson has declared me fully recovered, though I still tire more easily than before. Mrs. Patterson's sister has kindly offered me a place to stay in Cheyenne, and I have accepted her hospitality while I decide what comes next. I find myself thinking of you often, wondering if you are safe, if you have found what you sought. Sheriff Miller assures me that you are more than capable of taking care of yourself, but I cannot help but worry. Life in Cheyenne is different from what I have known. The city is growing rapidly, with new people arriving daily. Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Patterson's sister, has introduced me to the school board, who are in need of a teacher for the younger children. I have applied for the position, drawing on my education from years ago. Teaching was once my dream before I met Robert, and it seems fitting to return to it now that I am free. Free. Such a simple word for such a profound feeling. I owe that freedom to you, Vaughn Tucker. You saved not only my life but my spirit when you found me in that desert. I will forever be grateful. I do not know if you will return to Timber Creek or if our paths will cross again. But if they do, please know that you will always find a friend in me. With deepest gratitude, Lillian Shepard." There was a postscript, written in a hasty hand, as if added at the last moment. "I still have the paper with the location of the Double Bar Ranch. Perhaps one day, when my new life is more settled, I might find my way there, if you would welcome such a visit." Vaughn read the letter twice more, his heart lightening with each reading. She was well. She was building a new life, and most importantly, she had not forgotten him. He spent only one night in Timber Creek before continuing on to Cheyenne. The territorial capital was indeed growing rapidly, as Lillian had written, with construction visible in every direction. It took Vaughn several inquiries to locate the home of Mrs. Evans, a tidy house on a tree-lined street near the center of town. A maid answered his knock, regarding his travel-worn appearance with suspicion until he gave his name. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Tucker, please wait here. I'll inform Mrs. Evans of your arrival." Vaughn removed his hat, suddenly aware of his dusty clothes and unshaven face. He should have taken time to clean up, to make himself presentable, but the desire to see Lillian had overwhelmed such practical considerations. Mrs. Evans appeared a moment later, a plump, pleasant-faced woman who bore a striking resemblance to her sister in Timber Creek. "Mr. Tucker," she greeted him warmly. "What a pleasant surprise. My sister wrote that you had gone in search of Mrs. Shepard's husband. Were you successful?" "Yes, madam." "He's being brought back to Wyoming to stand trial." Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. "I was hoping to see Mrs. Shepard if she's receiving visitors." "Of course. She's at the schoolhouse now, interviewing with the board, but she should return shortly. Please come in and wait." Mrs. Evans led him to a comfortable parlor, offered refreshments, and tactfully suggested he might like to wash away the dust of the trail while waiting for Lillian's return. Vaughn gratefully accepted, and by the time he heard the front door open 20 minutes later, he had made himself as presentable as possible under the circumstances. He stood as footsteps approached the parlor, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then she was there, framed in the doorway, more beautiful than his memory had painted her. Lillian wore a simple blue dress, similar to the one she'd worn when he left Timber Creek, but there the similarity ended. Her golden hair was arranged in a neat chignon, her posture straight and confident. The bruises that had marred her fair skin were gone, and her blue eyes were clear and bright. She looked like a woman reborn. For a moment, she simply stared at him, disbelief giving way to joy. "Vaughn," she breathed, "you came back." "I promised I would," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They stood there, drinking in the sight of each other, until Mrs. Evans discreetly cleared her throat. "I believe I hear the kettle boiling," she said, though no such sound was audible. "I'll just see to that and leave you two to catch up." When they were alone, Lillian took a step toward him. "Did you find him, Robert?" "Yes, he's being brought back to Wyoming for trial." Vaughn hesitated, then added gently, "You won't have to testify if you don't want to. Sheriff Miller has your statement and I can speak to what I found." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I don't think I could face him again." "You'll never have to," Vaughn promised. "He can't hurt you anymore, Lillian." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the light floral scent of her perfume. "Your letter said you were applying to teach," he said, seeking safer ground than the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Yes. The interview went well, I think. They'll decide by the end of the week." Her eyes searched his face. "How long will you stay in Cheyenne?" "That depends," he said carefully. "On what? On you." The words came out before he could reconsider them. "Lillian, I didn't just come back to tell you about Robert. I came back because—" He faltered, searching for the right words. "Because," she prompted, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Because in all my travels through all those miles, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about that kiss we shared, about the way you looked at me the day I rode out of Timber Creek." Vaughn took a deep breath. "I know it's too soon. You're just starting to rebuild your life, and the last thing you need is another man making demands. Is that what you're doing, making demands?" There was a teasing note in her voice that he'd never heard before. "No, madam," he said quickly. "Just telling you that, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a man who thinks you hang the moon and stars." A slow smile spread across Lillian's face. "What if I told you I couldn't stop thinking about you either? That every night I'd look up at those same moon and stars and wonder where you were, if you were safe, if you ever thought of me." Hope bloomed in Vaughn's chest. "I'd say that's a good start." "And what if I told you," she continued, moving closer still, "that while I'm not ready for—" Everything? Right away, I am ready to explore what might be between us. I'd say I'm a patient man, Vaughn replied, his voice dropping to a whisper as she came to stand directly before him. And that some things are worth waiting for. Lillian reached up, her hand gently touching his cheek. You saved my life, Vaughn Tucker. But more than that, you showed me that not all men are like Robert, that there's still goodness and honor in the world. And you showed me there's more to life than riding the range and following orders, he said, covering her hand with his own. You gave me something to fight for. The kiss that followed was different from their first, not a goodbye tinged with fear and uncertainty, but a beginning, filled with promise and hope. When they finally parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers, content in a way he'd never known before. What happens now? Lillian asked softly. Now, Vaughn said, we take our time, get to know each other properly. I've got to head back to the double bar soon. They're probably wondering if I've ridden off the edge of the earth, but Cheyenne's not so far that I can't visit regularly. And if I get the teaching position, then you'll be building the life you always wanted, and maybe someday, if you decide I fit into that life. He trailed off, leaving the future open, undemanding. Lillian's smile was like the sunrise breaking over the plains. I think you already do, Cowboy. Over the following months, their relationship blossomed slowly, deliberately. Lillian secured the teaching position and threw herself into her work, discovering a talent and passion for education that had lain dormant during her years with Robert. Vaughn returned to the double bar but rode to Cheyenne whenever he could get away, sometimes staying only a day, sometimes a week. They courted properly, with chaperoned dinners at Mrs. Evans's house, walks through the growing city, picnics by the creek when weather permitted. Vaughn learned that Lillian loved poetry and could recite Tennyson from memory. She discovered his hidden talent for storytelling, delighting in the tales he spun of life on the range. Robert Shepard's trial came and went. He was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. Lillian, true to Vaughn's promise, did not have to face him in the courtroom. When the news reached them, she wept not for the man she had once loved, but for the final closing of that dark chapter in her life. As winter settled over Wyoming, Vaughn asked Lillian a question that had been forming in his heart since the day he'd returned to find her in Cheyenne. They were sitting in Mrs. Evans's parlor, a fire crackling in the hearth, the windows frosted with delicate patterns of ice. Outside, snow fell gently, blanketing the city in pristine white. I've been thinking, Vaughn began, setting aside the book he'd been reading to her. A dangerous pastime, Lillian teased, her blue eyes dancing with mischief. Might be, he agreed with a smile. Especially when I'm thinking about asking the prettiest schoolteacher in Wyoming Territory to marry me. Lillian's breath caught, the teasing light in her eyes replaced by something deeper, more vulnerable. Vaughn, I know it hasn't been that long, he continued quickly. And if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Lillian. Have since I found you in that desert, I think, though it took me a while to recognize it. You love me, she whispered, as if hearing the words for the first time, with everything I am. He took her hands in his. I want to build a life with you. Not the kind of life Robert tried to force on you, but one we create together, as equals. One where you can keep teaching if you want, or paint sunsets, or do whatever makes your heart sing. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I love you too, Vaughn Tucker. And yes, I'll marry you. Not because you saved me, but because of the man you are every day since. They were married in the spring, when the plains exploded with wildflowers and the air was sweet with promise. The ceremony was small Mrs. Evans and the Pattersons from Timber Creek, a few friends from the double bar, Lillian's fellow teachers. Sheriff Miller came too, a pleased witness to the conclusion of a story that had begun with a near tragedy. Vaughn had spent the winter building a small house on land he'd purchased outside Cheyenne, close enough for Lillian to continue teaching while he worked at a nearby ranch. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, a home built on mutual respect and love, the antithesis of everything Lillian had endured with Robert. On their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of their new home, watching the stars emerge above the plains, Vaughn wrapped his arms around his wife and pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Lillian replied, leaning back against his chest. "Do you remember what you said that day you found me in the desert?" "I said a lot of things that day," Vaughn admitted. "Most of them just trying to keep you alive. You said he'll answer for that." "About Robert?" She turned in his arms to face him. "And he did. But what I didn't understand then was that you weren't just promising justice. You were promising me a future where men answer for their actions, good and bad. And do I answer for mine?" he asked softly. "Every day," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "With kindness and honor and love." As the years passed, their love only deepened. Lillian continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Hope. 2 years later came a son, Samuel, named after the doctor who had helped save Lillian's life. Vaughn eventually became foreman of the ranch where he worked, respected throughout the territory for his fairness and skill. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Lillian would sometimes sit on the porch with her paints, capturing the brilliant colors of the Wyoming sunset. Vaughn would watch her work, marveling at the beauty she created, at the strength that had allowed her to reclaim her passions after years of suppression. "What are you thinking?" she asked one such evening, noticing his contemplative gaze. "Just that some men spend their whole lives searching for gold in these hills," he replied, moving to stand behind her, "when the real treasure was waiting to be found in a desert, half dead but still fighting." "Charmer," she accused, but she leaned back against him, content. "Truth teller," he corrected, his arms encircling her waist. Together they watched as the last light faded from the western sky, secure in the knowledge that they had built something rare and precious, a love born from the ashes of cruelty, tempered by justice, and strengthened by the passage of time. A love that would endure, like the land that had brought them together, through all the seasons of their lives.